Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring you today's most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. As the world faces complex geopolitical challenges, the outcome of the U.S. presidential election has added uncertainty to the global stage. With Trump's return to power in January, both domestic and international shifts are expected, raising key questions about his policies and their global impact. Now, at the same time, the broader world is facing its own set of ongoing crises that are likely to be influenced by Trump's leadership. The conflict in Ukraine, now into its fourth year, remains one of the most pressing global security issues, while the situation in Gaza continues to destabilize the Middle East. In this discussion, we will explore these critical issues, delving into what Trump's re-election might mean and how these will shape the global landscape in 2025 and beyond. For this, we are joined by Pan Gil-ju, Assistant Professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. Welcome, Professor.
Good to be with you.
And also joining us will be Christophe Godin, Professor of Political Science at Kookmin University. Great to have you, Professor.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So first, let's start with Professor Ban. This year's biggest global issue, of course, was the U.S. presidential election held on November 5. Despite polls predicting a very close race, it ended in a decisive victory for Trump. What does Trump's victory mean about the political and economic situation in the United States?
Well, we need to think about what encouraged American voters to choose Trump again as an American leader in a situation where they were disappointed in him 4 years ago. First of all, American voters recognized both Biden and Harris as too weak to preserve American interests in front of international and domestic challenges. To put it another way, they were disappointed in the Democratic Party, which appeared to be lukewarm, not dynamic enough to deal with challenges. Second, similarly, American voters' choice of Trump means that American voters put more emphasis on material than values. The 2024 presidential election was regarded as a competition between democracy and direct American interests. In this sense, Trump's decisive victory implies that American voters are less passionate about democracy than direct economic gains these days. Meanwhile, Trump's return is likely to bring both opportunities and risks for the United States. In terms of opportunities, Trump's transactional approach with maximum pressure helps step up its leverage over others so that the United States can maximize its gains, at least from a short-term perspective. When it comes to risks, Make America Great Again principles could weaken the United States' status as a role model of democracy in the world and discourage free trade, serving as a driver for sustainable prosperity. All in all, I would say that American voters wanted a strong man to be their national political leader, enough to win its strategic competition with revisionists like China, and an American first-oriented man to be their economic leader, sufficient to make their country prosper. In the meantime, it remains to be seen whether the second Trump administration will meet Americans' political and economic expectations.
Right. So as our Professor Bond kind of mentioned, Trump has campaigned under the slogan, Make America Great Again. And this is expected to seek and erase the Biden administration's legacy after taking office again. Professor Godin, what major policy changes are expected in a potential, a second Trump administration?
We've got a point of comparison. And this point of comparison, obviously, is Trump's first term, as is not only the 45th, but also the 47th president of the United States. So probably what we can expect is probably a sort of remake of the first term, but with even more radical turn to be expected. For instance, the tariffs that some hope and others fear. You may remember that there are no novelties. They come as no surprise, as Trump implemented tariffs the first time, namely against China, in order to protect the American iron industry. Similarly, this tough stance is taking on immigration is no surprise either, as he was already elected the first time in 2016 on this very same pledge of erecting a wall along the border between Mexico and the United States. So what I think we can expect is a sort of remake of the first term, but with a change. The change, namely, is that this time he won, as you mentioned first, a very decisive victory, not a short one as a few years ago. And this time his victory was planned. It was expected. It's come as no surprise at all. And so this time you've had a lot of policymakers, for instance, this think tank, the Heritage Foundation, that has been coming up with this project, the infamous 2025 project, in order to push for more protectionist, conservative, populist policies. So in a nutshell, if I were to summarize my point, the same but worse.
Right, so more protectionist policies were what Americans actually wanted. Now, there are concerns that the reality of tariff hikes will follow Trump's return to office. And during the campaign, he promised universal tariffs of up to 20% on all imports and 60% tariffs on Chinese imports. Professor Ban, how do you think will Trump's re-election affect the global economy in all?
Obviously, if tariff hikes become a reality, the global economy will be disintegrated and stumbling. As of right now, we are already living in a transitional international order, which is often defined as the New Cold War. Under the New Cold War mechanism, zero-sum logic is at the forefront as opposed to the non-zero-sum logic. Likewise, the window of globalization is closing under the New Cold War mechanism. If tariffs were imposed indeed in the second Trump administration as planned, the New Cold War mechanism would be more intensified, leading to the spread of protectionist mechanism around the world, as has been noted earlier. To top it off, the United States imposition of tariffs will backfire on other tariffs on itself. The economic concept of comparative advantage, which promotes the efficiency of the global economy, will stop working, hindering trade from being made freely and stopping resources from being distributed effectively. If that happens, the price of goods will go up and the supply chain will not be properly managed. In particular, if the United States imposes 60% tariffs on Chinese goods, China will rush to impose similar levels of tariffs on American goods, leading to the possible outbreak of a trade war. Meanwhile, the trade war is not likely to stop as an economic war, but likely to make military tension grow. In a nutshell, if tariff hikes were real, the global economy would be deadlocked and global security would be at stake.
Right, so let's hope that would not happen. Now, with Trump's victory, the Republican Party now controls both the Senate and the House of Representatives, and Trump has filled his administration with loyalists, of course. With both the executive and legislative branches under his control, will the Trump-controlled governance continue, Professor Goudin?
Or in a nutshell, probably yes. Very much so, because the difference with what happened now 4 years ago is that this time all internal opposition has been swept away from the Republican Party. The only major figure in the Trump administration that exists on his own will be Elon Musk, probably, that is not owning everything to President Trump. But Musk is no professional politician. As he was born a South African citizen, he cannot run for president next time. So therefore, you can expect his input to be minimal in terms of policies that will be implemented on a daily basis. Again, this is what we saw a few years ago, because there is no major figure that you can remember from Trump's first term, but Trump himself. And so this time, I think it will be even worse. These old school Republicans, for instance, like, say, Mitch McConnell, that used to be the whip of the Republican majority in Senate, he's retired now. So all of those old school Republicans, they don't exist anymore. What we have is hardline Trumpers all over the Republican Party.
So with this Trump-controlled administration, Professor Ban, the launch of his second term could bring major challenges for the South Korean government. In particular, what pressure might the government face regarding the defense cost-sharing agreement for U.S. forces Korea, and what changes are expected in U.S. policy toward North Korea as well?
Well, when Trump returns to the White House, key security principles that have been maintained for a long time are expected to be stumbling or even changed, including the ROK-US alliance. Trump is less willing to differentiate between allies and enemies while heavily relying on a transactional approach. The different-looking perspective caused by this transactional approach could make the ROK-US alliance be challenged, similar to the previous case that had happened under the first Trump administration. Despite the possible challenges, I don't think that ROK-US alliance will be gone. However, as the second Trump administration attempts to renegotiate the SMA Special Measures Agreement with South Korea in terms of defense cost sharing, the ROK-US alliance could become less valuable and is seen as less cohesive. In particular, although the second Trump administration does not want to decouple the ROK-US alliance, it is most likely to take advantage of the United States forces in Korea and ask for more money than the money that had already been negotiated under the Biden administration. What worries me is that when the United States raises the issue of the reduction or withdrawal of American troops in Korea just as part of the negotiation tactics, South Korean citizens could be less trustworthy in the United States security commitments, including in its nuclear umbrella, which might end in making alliance weaker. To top it up, the Trump could rush to meet Kim Jong-un even in a situation where the ROK-US alliance seems to be less cohesive. I believe that the United States will consult with South Korea before the bilateral meeting between the United States and North Korea, but a hasty meeting will be still risky in the sense that North Korea could take advantage of this meeting as an opportunity to be officially recognized as a nuclear power in the world. So South Korea needs to strongly demand that the United States hold detailed consultations with South Korea early enough and detailed, including agendas and key objectives of possible meetings.
Right, so close communication between Washington and Seoul would be the key. Now, meanwhile, two major conflicts, the war in Ukraine and the Gaza conflict, continued this year. Professor Godong, first, could you assess the current situation of the war between Ukraine and Russia, which is already 3 years now?
In fact, these two conflicts, you are right to mention them because they are the two major conflicts that the world is facing now. But still, they're different. The only thing they have in common is that in both cases, the US is involved. The US is involved with supporting Israel on the one hand and Ukraine on the other hand. But the difference is that in Palestine, Israel is the power dropping bombs, while Ukraine is obviously at the other end of the spectrum, as Ukraine is under Russian bombs. So now, what is interesting with this conflict in Ukraine is that Ukraine, as we all know, can only survive, can only endure with the help of the US. Ukraine has been resisting much better than most observers expected. Western economic sanctions are kicking in. We know now that Russian economy is meeting its limitations. So the money, the time, the efforts that the US has been investing in Ukraine are paying off. However, ironically enough, they are paying off just when a new president is elected and when this president very obviously has been vocal about his will to withdraw from this conflict. So now it is extremely difficult It's always difficult, first, as a rule, to say what President Trump is having in mind. But should he withdraw abruptly from Ukraine, you could expect the conflict to end very soon, and you could expect President Putin finally to be able to meet most of his objectives, which is why, as obviously all of this would be making Russia's position stronger and America's position weaker, I am not sure that Trump, who's the most vocal proponent of American interest decreasing off, I'm not sure that he would be giving such a huge present to President Putin. Wait and see here.
Right, so we'll have to wait and see until President Trump takes office in January. But the war in Ukraine has entered a new phase this year with the deployment of North Korean troops, of course. Professor Ban, what kind of impact has the deployment of North Korean soldiers had on the Ukraine war?
I would say that the deployment of North Korean troops has a ripple effect in many ways, politically, strategically, operationally, and tactically. First of all, it turns out the rise of geopolitical convergence to the policy area. Under the transitional international order, we face geopolitical convergence where security in one geopolitical region cannot be separated from security in another geopolitical region. The deployment of North Korean troops makes this geopolitical convergence stronger and encourages countries to adopt geopolitical linking policies. For example, the fact that South Korean government sent an observer team to the Eurasian front line clearly shows how it attempts to recognize the geopolitical convergence and adopt policies related to it. Second, it changes strategic mechanism in the world as well as in the region. The deployment of North Korean troops shows how fast the new strategic alliance between North Korea and Russia moves simply beyond the Eurasian front line. The strategic ties between North Korea and Russia are intended to revise the international order in their favor against American-led illiberal order. Since this strategic deal has a long-term goal, the second deployment of North Korean troops is likely. Third, the deployment of North Korean troops helps them familiarize modern operations, including drone warfare. Their learning of modern operations is expected to help them better prepare for the Second Korean War as well, in a situation where Kim Jong-un ordered the military to fulfill war preparedness. In this sense, geopolitical convergence is happening indeed with it linked to the situations on the Korean Peninsula. Finally, the deployment of North Korean troops also helps Ukraine's forces better fight tactically against Russia by allowing them to use long-range missiles like America's ATACMS and Britain's Storm Shadow. Moreover, the United States stepped up its military support for Ukraine in return for the deployment of North Korean forces. In this vein, Ukraine forces are not only perplexed by the deployment of North Korean troops, but also are ironically better armed by them.
Right. Now, amid this concern of the closing of ties between North Korea and Russia, Russian President Vladimir Putin sent a New Year's letter to North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, pledging to continue the cooperative leadership into next year. Professor Godang, with continued coordination expected in 2025, how do you see the global security landscape unfolding?
Well, it's been a few years now that Vladimir Putin has tried to establish himself as basically the leader of all anti-American forces all over the world. That's why, for instance, he spent so many resources in defending the regime of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, for instance. But now Russia is in a defensive position. The invasion of Ukraine didn't go as planned, because, as you mentioned, so it took place almost 3 years ago now, and the conflict is not coming to any end. Second, the Russian economy is slowing down. Economic Western sanctions are kicking in. Third, the alliances that Vladimir Putin has been trying to secure all over the world, in particular with Russia, they have turned to his disadvantage, because it's become clearer and clearer that China and not Russia was the dominant partner in this alliance, so that now Vladimir Putin needs new allies and he cannot be picky with these allies. This is why I think he turned to North Korea, because North Korea is exactly in the same position. Namely, it is a regime that is very much of a loner on the international scene. And second, Russia, just like North Korea, both regimes are trying to emancipate themselves from the Chinese tutelage. So this is why it makes sense from their perspective to try to strengthen their ties, to stick together, so to speak. So you can expect Russia to keep developing ties with North Korea, but at the same time, the impact of this alliance globally is very questionable, in my opinion. Of course, in East Asia, it is a very disturbing influence, and South Korea needs to be very careful about all of this. But on a global scale, what allies do Russia and North Korea have? Actually, very, very few, which also makes them even more dangerous, because we all know in international relations that when a regime, in particular an authoritarian regime, is backed into a corner, these regimes have a tendency that has showed countless times in history, a tendency to become more and more aggressive. Mm-hmm. So which is why these ties between North Korea and Russia are actually very bad news. They're very concerning, if not for the world, at least for the East Asian region.
Right. Now, circling back to what Professor Godang has mentioned a while ago about Trump being vocal about trying to end the war in Ukraine and Russia as soon as he gets office. Professor Ban, how do you see things moving forward after Trump's inauguration regarding the war in Ukraine?
Well, Trump's return to the White House will serve as a source of both stability and instability, as well as both risks and opportunities. Both the Ukraine war and the Gaza conflict have been underway much longer than expected. In particular, the Ukraine war has been deadlocked with little possibility of a ceasefire as of right now. In the meantime, those geopolitical conflicts have caused heavy casualties of many people, including innocent civilians. In this sense, it is right about time to make a new world trial in a fresh way. Having said that, Trump's inauguration served as a momentum for this new attempt because he is very good at stepping up the leverage over others, including Russia and Israel. It seems that all parties have already put more emphasis on making a ceasefire deal than before, around the time of Trump's return. So the Trump two fronts are expected to be more dynamic than before in terms of the efforts for a ceasefire. However, I'm not sure whether his return leads to the evolution of the two fronts or their degeneration at the end of the day, because how to well end the war matters more than how to fast end the war from a long-term perspective. Whether it turns out the evolution or not is most likely turned to how well the second Trump administration appears to serve as an impartial mediator for all parties involved, and how well it is armed with robust carrots and sticks. In addition, since Trump's leverage is likely to lower as time goes by, I would say that it should get things done as an early stage of the second Trump administration, which means that it will be a tough job and a difficult task even under Trump.
Right, so let's hope for the war to be ended in a well, instead of just being fast. We'll have to leave our discussion right here. Many thanks to Professor Ban and Professor Godang again for your insights tonight. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Now, that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.